Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a file that I think a lot of us feel like we already know, or at least we know the vibe of it. We were talking about the Renaissance.
Right.
And I'll be honest, when I hear that word, my brain immediately goes to a very specific aesthetic.
Yeah.
You know,
Marble statues and oil paintings. Maybe some lute music in the background.
exactly. I see Michelangelo lying on his back painting the Sistine Chapel. I see Leonardo da Vinci sketching, helicopters and flying machines.
The Ninja Turtles.
The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, Raphael. It just feels like this golden glowing era of human history, a time of genius and beauty.
And that's the popular perception. It's what I'd call the Disney version, if you will.
A highlight reel.
It is a highlight reel of incredible beauty and innovation. But if you actually dig into the source material and the timelines, the letters from the era, the church records, you find something very, very different sitting right underneath it.
You find a mess, a total mess.
You find a catastrophic mess. It's funny, one of the historians in our stack describes this era using that famous Dickens line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
And he's not just being poetic.
Not at all. He's being literal. It's this profound paradox.
And this is what we call the double vision of history, right?
Yeah.
On one layer, you have this explosion of art and culture that we all love. But underneath that, or maybe even fueling it, you have a civilization that is on the brink of total collapse.
Absolutely.
You have the Black Death wiping out a third of the population. You have a church that is so corrupt it's practically unrecognizable. You have constant war.
So our mission today is to look past the pretty paintings. We want to get into the engine room.
Yeah.
We want to understand what caused this rebirth. Why did Europe suddenly need a renaissance? Because you don't get a rebirth, which is, that's literally what the word means, unless something has died first.
And specifically, since this is a deep dive into church history, we have to tackle the elephant in the room. How did a movement that seems to start with guys, geeking out over old Greek grammar books, how did that end up splitting the Western church completely in half?
That is the key question. It's the central mystery, in a way. So today, we are tracing the thread from what one poet called the sewer of the world, and we will definitely get to that quote, all the way to the morning star of the Reformation.
And for you, the listener, who might be wondering, why does this 600-year-old history matter to me on a Tuesday? We are going to land on some really heavy application.
We are.
Because the battle these guys fought, this fundamental battle between the institution and the text, is a battle we are arguably still fighting today in our own lives.
Couldn't agree more. The names change, the costumes change, but the tension, that core tension, remains the same.
So let's lay out the sources. We aren't just riffing here. We have a stack. We've got several surveys of church history covering the period from roughly 1300 to 1600.
We also have some fantastic biographies of the key pre-Reformation figures, people like John Wycliffe and Jan Hus, who we'll talk about.
And we have some primary documents that are, honestly, they're shocking to read today.
The Unam Sanctum is the big one, and the Letters of Petrarch. These aren't later interpretations. These are the actual words written by the people who are living through this crisis. It's raw.
Okay, let's do it. Let's jump into section 1, the context, or as you've called it, the darkness. If the Renaissance is the light, we have to understand the shadow it came out of.
And to understand the 14th and 15th centuries, you have to realize that the entire system of the Middle Ages was breaking down. And the absolute center of that system was the papacy.
Which means we have to talk about Pope Boniface VIII. The year is 1302.
Boniface. He's a fascinating character study. If you were to graph the power of the Pope over history, Boniface represents the absolute dizzying peak right before the whole thing just crashes.
So he's the high water mark.
The highest of high water marks. He was arrogant, deeply political, and incredibly aggressive. And in 1302, he issues a papal bull called Unam Sanctum.
And a bull is just a formal legal decree, right? It gets its name from the lead seal, the bulla that's attached to it.
Exactly. It's the most official document the Pope can issue. And in this decree, he lays out a theological concept that had been brewing for a while, but he states it in the most extreme terms possible. It's called the two swords theory.
The two swords. Okay, break that down.
He argues that God gave two swords to the world to govern it, the spiritual sword and the temporal or political sword.
And let me guess, he thinks he should hold both of them.
Precisely. He claims that the church holds the spiritual sword directly and that the temporal sword is held by kings and rulers only at the permission of the priest.
Wow.
He is effectively saying, I am the emperor of emperors. Every king, every prince, every duke on this continent rules because I allow him to. It's an astonishing claim of absolute power.
I want to read the closing line of this document because it is chilling. I have it right here. He writes, "Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every human creature be subject to the Roman pontiff."
Just let that sink in for a moment. He is not saying faith in Christ is necessary for salvation. He's not even saying being part of the church is necessary. He's saying political and spiritual submission to him, Boniface, is the absolute requirement for heaven.
It's the ultimate consolidation of power. It's breathtaking.
It is.
But here is where history takes a turn that plays out. I mean, it's like a gangster movie. He writes this check, this enormous theological check, but he can't cash it.
Reality strikes back hard. The King of France at the time, Philip IV, was not impressed. He was building his own nation state and was not about to take orders from a pope in Rome.
He basically said, "You think you control me. Watch this."
That's pretty much it. Philip sends his pop henchman, a guy named Nogaret, down to Italy to the pope's vacation home in a town called Anagni. They break down the doors, they find the pope, and they beat him up.
They kidnapped the vicar of Christ on earth.
They held him hostage for 3 days, and while he was eventually rescued by some locals, he died about a month later, and the sources say it was largely from the shock and the profound shame of it all.
And the rumors at the time, which we see in the sources, were that his successor, Benedict XI, was poisoned.
That was the gossip. The story was that he was given poisoned figs.
Poisoned figs. You can't make this up.
So you have this collision, this incredible collision between the high-minded theology of I rule the world and the gritty, violent reality of French soldiers punching you in the face. The theory didn't hold up.
And this event triggers what historians call the Babylonian captivity of the church, which is a really loaded name.
It's a direct reference to the Old Testament exile of the Jews to Babylon. But in this case, the exile was the papacy moving from Rome to a city called Avignon in France.
Why France?
Because the French king, Philip, wanted to keep an eye on his new puppet. After the humiliation of Boniface, the next pope was French, Clement V, and he never even went to Rome. He just set up shop in France.
For, what, 70-something years?
72 years. From 1309 to 1377, the popes, the supposed bishops of Rome, did not live in Rome. They lived in the south of France under the thumb of the French monarchy.
And this is where the corruption goes from being, bad to being completely systemic. We have this incredible source, the poet Petrarch, who is really the father of humanism, which we'll get to later, and he visits Avignon.
And he is horrified. He absolutely hates it. He calls it the sewer of the world.
That's the actual quote.
That's his quote. He describes it as a place where God is held in contempt and money is worshipped, where truth is considered madness and falsehood is celebrated. It's a scathing indictment.
Because they needed money to build their new palaces, right? They built this massive papal palace in Avignon.
They needed massive amounts of money to fund their new court, so they industrialized corruption. This is where simony becomes totally rampant.
And simony is
selling church offices. If you wanted to be a bishop, you paid for it. If you wanted your 7-year-old nephew to be an abbot, you paid for it. It was all for sale. And of course, indulgences.
selling forgiveness.
Selling time off in purgatory for you or your dead relatives. It became a massive, cynical business. The church was no longer a hospital for sinners. It had become a marketplace.
And just when you think, okay, this has to be rock bottom, the floor completely falls out. The captivity ends. The Pope finally goes back to Rome, and we get the Great Schism.
This is the moment the internal logic of the institution just breaks, utterly. In 1378, the Pope dies in Rome. The Roman people, who haven't had an Italian Pope in decades, basically surround the conclave and demand an Italian. Or else. So the cardinals elect an Italian, Urban VI. But he turns out to be difficult, volatile, violent, maybe even insane. So the French cardinals say, you know what? Mistake. We were under duress. We take it back. They flee Rome and elect a different pope, Clement VII, who sets up shop back in Avignon.
So now we have two popes.
2 popes, 2 colleges of cardinals, 2 entire church bureaucracies. And here is the kicker. They immediately excommunicate each other and all of their followers.
I just want to pause on that. Put yourself in the shoes of a regular medieval peasant. You can't read the Bible. It's in Latin.
Yeah.
You are told your entire life that the Pope holds the keys to heaven.
Right.
And now The Pope in Rome says the Pope in France is the Antichrist and is leading you to hell.
Hmm.
And the Pope in France says the Pope in Rome is the Antichrist and is leading you to hell. No matter who you follow, you are technically damned by a supposed vicar of Christ.
It was a crisis of profound spiritual anxiety. There was this metaphor they used, the seamless tunic of Christ representing the unity of the church.
From the Gospel of John?
Exactly. And now that tunic was torn in half. It destroyed the psychological safety that the church was supposed to provide. Who do you trust? Where is the truth?
And then they try to fix it. This is my favorite part.
Yeah.
The Council of Pisa in 1409.
Oh, this is just a comedy of errors. A group of leading churchmen get together and say, okay, this is ridiculous. We have a solution. The council decides to depose both popes and elect a new one, Alexander V.
A sensible plan.
Seems sensible, except the first two popes refused to step down, so
Now we have 3 popes.
now you have 3 popes. The Trinity of Popes, as it was mockingly called, it was a complete farce, and it forced people to ask a very dangerous question. If the head is this sick, if the leadership is this broken, maybe we need to look somewhere else for truth.
And while all of this spiritual leadership is playing musical chairs, the biological world is literally collapsing. We cannot skip over the Black Death.
1347, it is. It is probably the single most important event in medieval history. It's impossible to overstate its impact.
The sources are just visceral. We're talking about merchant ships arriving from the Crimea, from the Black Sea, with sailors who are either dead or dying at the oars.
Covered in these black boils, the buboes that give the bubonic plague its name. It was carried by fleas on rats that were on these ships, and it just spread like wildfire.
And the mortality rate is something we can't even really comprehend today. Between 1347 and 1351, in just 4 years, roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of the entire population of Europe died.
The numbers are staggering. We're talking somewhere between 24 and 50 million people. I imagine a world where every other person you know is dead in a few years.
I read somewhere, and I think that our sources, that the nursery rhyme Ring Around the Rosie actually comes from this period.
That is the common interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
And when you break it down, it's just horrifying. Ring around the rosy refers to the red, ring-like rash, the rosies, that appeared on the skin of victims.
Okay.
A pocket full of posies. People carried flowers and herbs, posies, to try and mask the overwhelming smell of sickness and rotting bodies in the streets. Ashes, or in some versions, a tissue, referred to the violent sneezing fits that often preceded death. And then, of course, we all fall down.
That is unbelievably dark. A children's game about mass extinction.
It just shows how deeply the trauma was embedded in the collective psyche of the culture. But for our purpose today, think about the religious impact. The good death, the ars moriendi, was a huge deal in medieval piety.
You needed a priest for last rites.
You absolutely had to have a priest to hear your final confession and give you absolution. But the priests were dying just as fast as everyone else. And many of them, frankly, fled in terror.
So the church couldn't save you physically from the plague, and in many cases they weren't even there to save you spiritually at the end.
Exactly. It created this huge vacuum of authority and trust. And in their terror, people look for scapegoats. We see the rise of the flagellants, these processions of people marching through towns, whipping themselves bloody to try and appease God's wrath.
But it got darker than that.
Much darker. We see the horrific persecution of the Jews. This insane conspiracy theory spread that Jewish communities were poisoning the wells and causing the plague. It was utter nonsense, of course, but panic makes people irrational and cruel.
And thousands were massacred.
Burned alive. It was a complete breakdown of civilization, of reason, of basic humanity.
So let's just summarize section 1 here. By the mid-1400s, the church is institutionally broken, it's morally corrupt, and it's split into 3 factions. The population is decimated by plague. The old feudal and scholastic systems are failing under the strain.
The field was completely burned, but burned soil is often the most fertile. Europe was desperate, absolutely desperate for a new way of seeing the world.
Which brings us perfectly to section 2, the catalysts. What sparked the fire? Because usually when things get this bad, you get a dark age, not a renaissance. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but sometimes an external shock is what forces a system to upgrade. And the first major shock was geopolitical. The fall of Constantinople in 1453.
The capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire.
For 1,000 years, it had stood as the Christian bulwark against the East. But in 1453, the Ottoman Turks, led by Mehmed the Conqueror, finally broke through the walls. For the Eastern Church, it was an absolute tragedy, but for the West, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, a massive injection of new data.
How so? What do you mean by data?
Because the scholars fled. The Greek-speaking intellectuals, monks, and bishops of Constantinople, they ran for their lives. And they didn't run with gold or clothes. They ran with what was most precious to them. They ran with books. They brought the cargo,
The manuscript?
the ancient Greek manuscripts. For nearly 1,000 years, the West had been an almost exclusively Latin civilization. They read the Latin Vulgate Bible. They read Latin translations of Aristotle. They had almost completely lost the ability to read Greek.
They were cut off from the source.
Totally. And suddenly you have this flood of refugees arriving in Italy, in places like Florence and Venice, saying, hey, we have the original Plato, we have the original Homer, and crucially, we have the original New Testament.
It's like finding the source code after you've been using a glitchy 1,000-year-old translation for 10 centuries.
That is the perfect analogy. And this new source code arrived right at the moment that the hardware was getting a massive upgrade, the printing press.
Johannes Gutenberg.
Yeah.
Around 1440, 1450, right in that window.
This cannot be overstated. We live in the internet age, so we're used to information moving fast, but this was a revolution on that scale. Before Gutenberg, a book was an unbelievable luxury item.
It was all done by hand.
By a scribe, a monk, copying it letter by letter onto vellum, which is treated animal skin. It could take a year to copy a single Bible. A small library was worth more than a castle. Knowledge was slow, and it was controlled.
And after Gutenberg?
The price plummeted, the speed skyrocketed. We call it the internet of the 15th century. But in some ways, it was more stabilizing than that. What it meant, fundamentally, was that ideas could not be killed anymore.
Right, because in 1300, if you have a heretical idea, the local bishop can arrest you, burn you at the stake, and burn your one-handwritten notebook. Idea gone.
Precisely. In 1500, if you have a radical idea, you take it to a printer and run off 500 pamphlets. Before the church even knows what's happening, they're in Paris, London, and Prague. You can still burn the author, but you can't burn the idea anymore. It's out there.
And at the exact same time, the physical world is literally expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Columbus in 1492, Vasco da Gama finding the sea route to India.
The map is getting bigger. The old claustrophobic medieval world is breaking open. Trade is exploding. New wealth from these trade routes is flowing into Italy, into the hands of banking families like the Medici in Florence. And that money, that patronage, is what funds the art, the architecture, and the scholarship.
So it's a perfect storm.
It is the perfect storm.
Right.
New money to pay for it, new tech to spread it, and new text to study.
So the stage is set. We have the crisis and we have the catalysts. Now we need the script, the big idea. Section 3, the concept, the motto of the whole movement, ad fontes.
This is the battle cry of the Renaissance. It's a Latin phrase that means to the sources or back to the fountains.
Meaning, stop reading all the layers of commentary and go read the original thing for yourself.
Exactly. The dominant way of thinking in the Middle Ages was scholasticism. It was all about layers of commentary and intricate logical systems. You would read what Thomas Aquinas said about what Peter Lombard said about what Augustine said about what Paul wrote in the Bible.
It's a game of telephone over centuries.
It is. And the Renaissance humanists came along and said, let's cut out all the middlemen. Let's go drink the clear water straight from the source, from the fountain.
We need to define humanism here, because today that word has a very secular, even anti-religious connotation.
Right. Today, if you say secular humanism, it implies a worldview with no God. That is not what Renaissance humanism was. It was overwhelmingly a Christian humanism.
So what did it mean for them?
For them, it was the belief that God created man in his image, with a mind, with reason, with dignity, and that using that mind to study the great works of the past, grammar, rhetoric, history, poetry, the Bible, was a profound act of worship.
So it was validating the intellect as a gift from God.
Yes. They believed that if you could clear away the centuries of rubble, the bad traditions, the superstitions, the mistranslations, and get back to the original truth, both in classical antiquity and in the Bible, it would revive the church and society.
And the captain of this team, the undisputed champion of Christian humanism, was Desiderius Erasmus.
The Prince of Humanists. I love this guy, too. He's brilliant, he's witty, he's illegitimate, the son of a priest, and he becomes the first true public intellectual of Europe, thanks to the printing press.
And his masterpiece, the work that really changes everything, is the Novum Instrumentum Omne of 1516.
A bit of a mouthful.
What was it?
It was the first published Greek New Testament. He gathered all the Greek manuscripts he could find, collated them, and put the original Greek text in one column, and his own fresh new Latin translation in the other column. And when he did that, he dropped an intellectual bomb on the entire theological system of the medieval church.
Let's use the specific example you flagged in the notes because it's so powerful. The word for repent.
This is the smoking gun. For 1,000 years, the Latin Vulgate had translated Jesus' command in Matthew 4.7 as ponitentiam agite.
Which means do penance.
Do. It's an action verb. It implies an external ritual. Go to the priest. Go to confession. Say 3 Hail Marys. Pay a fine. Do a pilgrimage. The entire sacramental system of the church, and not coincidentally, the financial model of selling indulgences, was built on this idea of doing penance.
But Erasmus, being a master of Greek, looks at the original text.
He looks at the Greek word, which is menoite, and he realizes, wait a second, this doesn't mean do a ritual. It's a compound word. Meta, which means after or change, and noi, which relates to the mind, the nous. The word means change your mind, repent, turn your heart around.
That is a tectonic shift in meaning.
Sure.
One is an external transaction with the church. The other is an internal transformation of the heart.
Exactly. In that one word, Erasmus showed that the church's entire requirement for doing penance wasn't actually in the Bible. It was based on a mistranslation. He exposed the gap between the institution and the text.
He didn't just translate, though. He was a master of satire. He mocked the church. Let's talk about the praise of folly.
This was his bestseller, published in 1509. It's a biting, hilarious satire where he just goes after the corruption and the folly of the church. He ridiculed the monks who were obsessed with the precise number of knots on their belt, but didn't know the first thing about the Gospels.
Yeah, in the relic trade.
Oh, he destroyed the relic trade. He famously said that if you gathered all the supposed pieces of the true cross that were being displayed in churches across Europe, you could build a ship. He just exposed it as a cynical fraud.
And he even went after the Pope himself. There's a famous scene he writes.
Yes, his anonymous dialogue, Julius Exclusus. Pope Julius II, who was known as the warrior pope, dies and goes to heaven. He shows up at the pearly gates in his full battle armor, smelling of blood and money, and he starts banging on the gates, demanding entry.
And St. Peter comes to the gate.
St. Peter looks out through the peephole, sees this guy, and says, I don't know you. You don't look anything like the Christ I followed. You look like a warlord. And he bars the Pope from entering heaven.
That takes some serious guts to publish, even anonymously.
It does, but Erasmus truly believed he could laugh the church back to sanity. He wanted reform, but he desperately wanted it from within. He never wanted to break the church.
Which leads to that famous saying.
Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched.
The egg and the chicken. Or maybe the dragon.
Right. Erasmus provided all the ammunition. He gave Luther the Greek text. He wrote the critiques of corruption. But he didn't want to pull the trigger. He was a scholar. He feared chaos more than he hated corruption.
But before we get to Luther hatching that egg, we have to recognize that Erasmus wasn't the first one hammering on the door. Section 4. The forerunners. The resistance.
History often compresses the timeline. We tend to think medieval darkness, then boom, Martin Luther. But there were 2 centuries of resistance fighters building up to the Reformation. We call them the pre-reformers.
And we have to start with the morning star of the Reformation, John Wycliffe, an Oxford professor in the 1300s.
Wycliffe was an absolute genius, a top theologian at Oxford. And he started pulling at the loose threads of the papacy way before it was popular or safe. He made the radical argument that the Pope is not the head of the church, Christ is.
And he had this powerful concept of the invisible church.
Right. He argued that the true church isn't the institution, it's not the guy in the fancy hat or the stone building. It is the collection of the elect, the true believers whose names are known only to God. That completely decenters the authority of the physical institution.
But his biggest crime, in the eyes of the church, was what he wanted to do with the Bible.
He had this radical democratic belief that the plowboy at his plow should know the law of God as well as the most learned priest. So he and his followers, the Lollards, undertook the massive project of translating the Bible from Latin into Middle English.
And the church's reaction to this was, well, it was intense.
They absolutely hated it. They saw it as a direct threat to their authority. They passed laws forbidding the laity from even possessing, let alone reading, an English Bible.
And what happened to Wycliffe?
He was protected by powerful English nobles, so he actually managed to die of a stroke in 1384. He died in peace. But the church was so angry at his lingering influence that 40 years later, at the Council of Constance, they officially condemned him as a heretic and ordered his body to be dug up.
This is post-mortem execution.
Oh.
It's just so bizarre.
It's incredibly grisly. They exhumed his skeleton. They held a little trial for the bones. Then they burned the bones to ash. and they threw the ashes into the local river, the River Swift, because they wanted to erase every last trace of him from the earth.
But there's that beautiful quote from the historian Thomas Fuller about what happened next.
Yes, it's one of my favorites. He wrote that the River Swift bore Wycliffe's ashes to the Avon into the Severn into the narrow seas, and the seas into the main ocean. And so the ashes of Wycliffe became the emblem of his doctrine, which is now dispersed all the world over.
The attempt to destroy him just became a metaphor for his success.
Exactly. You can't drown an idea.
And that doctrine, those ideas, flowed straight across Europe to Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic. And it landed in the mind of a scholar named Jan Hus.
Jan Hus, a brilliant scholar and preacher at the University of Prague. He read Wycliffe's writings and just became captivated by them. He started preaching them from the pulpit in Prague.
And his name is important here, isn't it?
It's crucial. Hus literally means goose in the Czech language.
Yeah.
It's a detail that will become very important.
So the goose starts honking in Prague.
He starts honking. He preached against the sale of indulgences. He preached that the Bible is the final authority for a Christian, not the Pope. And because he preached in the common language, he became incredibly popular with the people.
But then comes the betrayal. It's the same Council of Constance that condemned Wycliffe's bones.
The year is 1415. The Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund invites Hus to the council to explain his views, and he gives him an imperial promise of safe conduct, basically a royal guarantee. Come and make your case, and no matter what happens, we promise you can return home safely.
But it was a trap.
It was a complete trap. Hus arrives and is almost immediately arrested and thrown into a dungeon. When he protests and brings up the promise of safe conduct, the church leaders basically tell him promises don't count when they're made to heretics.
They put him on trial.
It wasn't a trial, it was a sentencing. They demanded that he recant his views, and he gave this classic response: "Show me in the Bible where I am wrong, and I will gladly recant."
They couldn't do it.
They couldn't, so they condemned him to be burned at the stake.
And the execution details are so symbolic, they put a hat on him.
They did. They put a tall paper dunce cap on his head, and on it they had painted 3 demons fighting for his soul, with the inscription, "This is the arch-heretic." They wanted to humiliate him.
But as the fire was being lit, Hus reportedly made a prophecy. He punned on his own name.
What did he say?
He reportedly said to his executioners, "You may cook this goose today, but in 100 years, a swan will arise that you cannot silence."
The swan.
The swan. And almost exactly 102 years later, in 1517, Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses. And if you look at old paintings from the Reformation, Luther is often depicted with a swan right next to him. The Reformers saw themselves as the fulfillment of Hus's prophecy.
That is absolute chilling. It just shows that the Reformation wasn't an accident. It wasn't just one angry monk. It was a culmination of centuries of this stuff.
Exactly. And we shouldn't forget the quieter voices, too. While Wycliffe and Hus were shouting from the rooftops, there were mystics who were whispering in the prayer closets.
The brethren of the common life.
Yes, a movement started by Gerard Groot and figures like Thomas à Kempis. They started a movement called Devotio Moderna, or the modern devotion. They weren't trying to overthrow the Pope. They were trying to help ordinary people love Jesus more sincerely.
And this is where we get the book The Imitation of Christ, which is still a bestseller 600 years later. It's amazing. Kempis wrote this incredible line. He said, "I would rather feel compunction, which is deep, heartfelt sorrow for sin, than know how to define it."
It was a powerful move from the head to the heart, from scholastic arguments to personal devotion.
And this movement influenced Erasmus and Luther very deeply. It taught them that faith wasn't just about public ritual or intellectual assent. It was about a personal, living relationship with God.
Okay, so we have the context, which was the darkness. We have the catalyst print and the new text. We have the concept ad fontes, and we have the forerunners Wycliffe and Hus. So section 5, the influence. How did all of this actually change the church and Christianity forever?
Well, I think the single biggest shift is a shift in the center of gravity of authority. Before the Renaissance, the center of gravity was the institution. Truth was what the church, specifically the magisterium and the Pope, said it was.
After the Renaissance.
The center of gravity shifted to the text, to the Bible. Once Erasmus and the other humanists gave people the tools of grammar and history to read the Bible for themselves in the original languages, the mystique of the institutional hierarchy was broken.
The magic trick was revealed.
In a way, yes. The Pope became just a man, and as they could now see by comparing his decrees to the text, often a very wrong man. It was the birth of critical thinking in the pews.
And it also validated the secular world, didn't it?
It absolutely did. The Renaissance taught that you could be a brilliant scientist like Copernicus, who, by the way, was a canon in the church, or a brilliant painter like Michelangelo, and that was a perfectly valid way to glorify God.
It ended the medieval idea that to be truly holy, you had to be a monk or a priest.
Right. You could be holy as a scholar, you could be holy as an artist, you could be holy as a husband and father. It expanded the playground of the Christian life into all of human endeavor.
Okay, let's land the plane. This is all fascinating history, but let's bring it home. Section 6, application. We have a listener, our learner. They've been on this journey with us, and they want to know, how does this help me live more fully for Christ today?
I think there are 4 massive direct takeaways from this specific era that are just as relevant now as they were then.
Let's hit them. Number 1.
First is the importance of ad fontes for us.
Back to the sources.
Look, we live in an age of information overload. We are drowning in content, and it is very, very easy to base your faith on what a podcaster says, or what a TikTok influencer says, or even what your favorite pastor says.
The game of telephone is still a problem?
It's a huge problem, but the spirit of the Renaissance challenges us directly. Do you read the Bible for yourself? Do you know the source code? Don't just take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it. Open the book. The text itself has a power to change you that no amount of commentary ever will.
That's good. Okay, number 2.
Faith amidst corruption.
This one feels heavy and very relevant today.
It is. A lot of people today feel deeply let down by the church. We see scandals, we see abuse, we see political hypocrisy, we see financial mismanagement, and the temptation is to look at all that and say, well, the whole thing must be a sham.
To just walk away.
But history tells a very different story. Look at the year 1400. The church was infinitely more corrupt than it is today. You had murderers and warlords in the papacy. The institution was a wreck. And yet, God preserved his truth.
It still had his people.
He raised up Wycliffe, he raised up Hus, he raised up Catherine of Siena. The seamless tunic might look torn and stained by men, but the thread of the gospel holds true. Our faith is in Christ, not in the institution. You can love Jesus even when the church breaks your heart.
That is a powerful word for someone listening right now. Okay, number 3.
The integration of faith and learning.
The Da Vinci mindset.
We have this terrible tendency in the modern world to compartmentalize. We have our sacred box and our secular box. This is my work life and this is my worship life. The Renaissance screams, no, your mind is a gift from God. Use it.
All truth is God's truth.
Exactly. If you are a coder, code with excellence for God's glory. If you study history, study it rigorously for God's glory. Do not be afraid of tough questions. Do not be afraid of science. The God who wrote the book of Scripture also wrote the book of nature. Explore them both with joy.
I love that. And finally, number 4.
Courage of conviction.
The goose.
Jan Hus. I mean, just try to imagine it. You are standing alone in a room against the emperor, the pope, the entire power structure of the known world. They are all screaming at you. And they tell you, just say the words, just recant, and you can live. And he says, my conscience is held captive by the word of God. I cannot and will not recant.
That is true courage.
We probably won't be asked to face a literal fire, but we might face the paper hat. We might be mocked. We might be canceled. We might lose a promotion or a friendship. The question in the life of Hus asks us is this: do you value the truth more than your safety, your comfort, or your reputation?
Can you be the goose?
Can you be the goose?
As we wrap up, I just want to leave us with a final thought to chew on. A bit of a historical what if.
Go for it.
We talked about Erasmus and Luther. Erasmus saw the corruption and wanted to clean the house with a feather duster. Luther came along with a sledgehammer. Erasmus wanted evolution. Luther brought revolution.
That's a great way to put it.
So here's the question. If Erasmus had been a little bit bolder, a little less afraid of chaos, or if the popes had been a little bit humbler and had actually listened to Erasmus's critique, could the Reformation have happened without the split? Could we have had a purified, unified Western Church?
That is the great tragedy of the 16th century, isn't it? It's a profound lesson that when institutional leadership refuses to listen to the Erasmuses, the gentle internal critics, they will eventually have to deal with a Luther, the external sledgehammer.
So something to chew on for all of us. Is it better to be the scholar that lays the egg or the force of nature that hatches it?
I think history shows God uses both, but it's a question worth asking.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. This history isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's our family history. It's in our DNA.
Go read the sources.
Keep